Oh my goodness, you
Yeah.
guys are awesome.
Get off my lawn.
Okay, I'm gonna here we go.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Do you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Thank you guys. Okay, this is some of the questions. I may not leave it up, but basically I sent these before. These are the questions. We're going to talk about gamified education today. In a nutshell, anyone in the chat, if you want to, of course, in the past few hours in the day, we've had chats, had an amazing chat in the chat as in parallel to the actual conversation in the panel. Robert Scoble was schooling us on the phygital side tools. It was really amazing. So if you guys had any chats, questions, we have a little less people here in this time. I guess people are slowing down, but the chat in this is open. If you have any questions, thoughts, would love to hear your perspective on it. And since we have so much to go over, we're going to basically get to it. Basically, the whole premise of this conversation is based on learning hasn't been updated, and economies, some say economies are won or lost by the growth of education and how it correlates to the economy. So with that being said, how do we basically move forward in the world, collectively learning better together? So we're going to have that as the proposed first question. I am Joshua Johnson, co-founder with PlayToLearn.com. Leanne Pham's here as well, MetaHug, also the co-founder of Play to Learn. Jay Moore is here with Prasaga Underwriting and helping us with this journey, with the Play to Learn journey and MetaHug and the Gamified Education. Thank you, Jay, for being here. It's incredible so far what we've done and so much yet to do. Andres Menes, thank you so much for being here. Source Protocol. Sorry, this is partnerships. The slide we didn't change. He's not the CEO, but partnerships. He has many companies. And John Pygott, CEO of Abe. Incredible exchange. We'll go into that more. Michael Dukakis.
Not C's. Don't worry about it. I get all
Sorry.
types of.
I couldn't see the pronunciation. Thank you so much, the co-founder of Life's Tough Media, and really the cartoons of that perspective. Get your perspective on the cartoons for the children. It's going to be an interesting collaboration, hopefully in the future. How we do that, even with the avatars and things. So, without any further ado, we're going to go right into it. Maybe we can open it up with Jay, and really talking about learning and what you see in the future in the world, how that really you being helping the economy and blockchain and different things, but how does the economy correlate with education, and how do we help refocus and change the paradigm shift in learning?
So it's a broad stroke. I think one of the things that I see is the impact on global economies that not just digital currency and blockchain can have, but also just the way we're headed. We're going to be less resource driven in many cases than we have been in our history. When you saw developing countries move to larger economies, they were built off of usually the resources available, whether it was oil or some other function. Now I see a different leveling of when we talk about leveling a playing field, where intellectual capacity and ability to engage digitally is going to become much more a driver of the economy. I was just looking at a bunch of data on all the industries that are going to be impacted and at what degree by the metaverse between now and 2030. And one of the the methodology was kind of guess and test, I thought, but it was all subject matter experts saying what they thought the impact was going to be. But one of the things that I noticed is looking at whether it was healthcare or any regulated industry, that the real change that was going to be seeing is that we're going to be engaging as humans differently. And I think when I look at economies, and I'm not an economist, but I seem to be talking to them a lot lately just because of the work we're doing with our digital currency. We really need to look at a different approach to how we measure things as far as impact. And I kind of mentioned that earlier, but just the idea that we've been externalizing a lot of costs that haven't been showing up. And now the bottom line is that humanity is paying for those things. Those are things that we've got to get so that those economies are reflective of that. And I think that to me is the biggest step forward we can take. And the ability for education to drive that's awareness from all, both consumers as well as business people.
Thank you. And Leanne, just from your perspective, MetaHug, Play to Learn, can you summarize basically what that looks like and basically why we're doing what we're doing in that sense?
Yeah, so in terms for the question?
Yeah, the question basically learning and correlating to the economies being won or lost. So for example, I was talking to Andres about Colombia, right? And the Minister of Education thinking about how do you rethink education for Colombia, right? So maybe if we have another model and change it up for education, and maybe their economy improves if their education improves, right? So what we're doing with gamified learning is helping more than just the education department. It has a larger overall impact globally, you know?
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what we were talking about previous, is just meeting the kids where they're at, really teaching them how to learn versus what to memorize and what to learn. And just moving, I mean, the world has evolved and going to Web3, but we haven't really, and we've changed some going onto the web, the internet. But I would say, focusing on more student-led, let them like really choose how take ownership, of what they want to learn. So I think that's important. I think just changing the whole philosophy behind education is important. The children these days are much different from our generations, and we really need to really meet where they're at and adapt to them. You know what I mean? And that's for brands, parents, and everybody. And I think at the core, of course, if they're learning better, then of course that affects everything, not just the economy. But that's my take on it.
And Andres, basically going back, as we talked, Colombia is a developing country. Helping things like this is expanding to help with economies and to see different paradigm shifts that can happen, to see movement in that. Maybe you talk about you've been Dubai, you're all over the world. Talk about that and how learning correlates to economies, and then how do we shift the paradigm and think about changing learning in a more serious fashion.
Well, thank you so much, Josh, for the invitation and for being amongst this amazing panel. So it's Billy here in the UK, so I have to come to the kids' room to have this music. I hope you can understand me.
Yes.
I'm trying to be not too loud, and I use my phone as my laptop the battery is not great. But I was just taking some notes based on what Jay and Leanne say and what you just said. I want just to be straightforward regarding education. For me, the best education that I had is since I started to travel, since I left Colombia. So in Colombia, we don't have enough resources, or we don't have, it's more difficult, to get to higher education. But what we do really well in Colombia is emotional education. Like it's not about maths or about physics or about technology. It's about the education that you receive at home. Is how do you connect with people and emotions. So this is something I've been trying to talk to my wife. She's English and Colombian, but I didn't know all of this until I have my own children, and I always thinking about, okay, let's see how I can teach my kids about football. Or for example, Emilio, my older son, he's very good at maths. He's very good learning stuff. The little one is also learning really quick to speak. She's only 3. But I was thinking a moment ago, I was watching a movie with the oldest one. And I think so emotions are very important. So we see in different patterns, different nationalities now that you say, Josh, that I travel the world. And yeah, I see every single nation, every single culture or every single continent, the education is different. But this is something that amused me, for example, in the Asian culture. And we are seeing the growth of the economy and how, for example, in blockchain and cryptocurrency, most of the executives in all the Web3 firms are Asian, you know. But now these cultures are merging to Latin America and Europe and America because they want to also understand this part of the world. So what I'm trying to say, Josh, for me, I think so emotions are very important. Maybe not many people talk about this. In Colombia, we are very emotional, you know. If, for example, in America, probably, or here in England, I've been here nearly 14 years, people here is not as emotional, we think, like in Colombia or in Latin America or in some countries in Africa or in some countries in the Middle East, you know. So I think emotions are something important that not many people talk about this. So yeah, we can have different matrix and we can have different roadmaps for education within the governments and stuff. I think so we always forget about emotion, how a kid can get affected. Like you can be the best kid in the school, but if your emotions are not right, in 10, 20 years, you're going to be a very successful person, but inside you're going to be not very happy. So I don't know if that makes sense, but for me,
no, it makes complete sense. I mean, I think the qualitative versus the quantitative, understanding this, John, we talked about Atlanta and the inner city kids, the emotions of having a father figure, right? The boot camp, like how does that correlate in how they learn and how they transform, how they learn will directly correlate their economy, their lifestyle, what they do for a living, right? I would love to hear your perspective on that, John.
Yeah, well, just first of all, just great to be part of the panel. I'm learning so much all the way across the board. What Josh is referring to is I was involved. I've lived about 20 years out of Atlanta mainly. I'm living in Austin, Texas, last few years. When I was in Atlanta, I started an inner city program in the inner city for, you know, these kids didn't know anyone that had a father. There was not a father in the entire communities, entire school system. So we're almost 99% fatherless kids. And what we saw was like this hunger, this thirst for young men to be around male authority figures. We started working with a couple of really good-natured retired Marine Corps drill sergeants who understand more about the psychology of the 16 to 18-year-old American male than any psychiatrist, any adolescent psychologist will ever even dream of understanding. And I saw that, like, and where I think it's applicable here is really two things. Well, first of all, the program started out with 50 kids. Within 4 weeks, there were over 1,200 kids coming for very intense 2-hour drill, boot camp style physical exercise every morning between 6 and 8 a.m. in the middle of the most dangerous projects, if you will, in Atlanta. And the reason it came up with, I was talking with Josh a couple of years ago about it, is that a few years ago, I always go over and we have a big, party in my house, all the team leaders. We've got over 1,800 kids involved, or actually, 2,800 kids involved with it now. And we got them all summer jobs, different teams, mowing lawns, raking leaves, doing whatever, just to keep them active, to keep them going. And a couple of years ago, they started asking, their main, critique or suggestion was, we'd like to start getting paid with Roblox instead of money. And I'm like, are you insane? It's like, what are you talking about? But it goes back to something that Sharon Hudson was saying in the last panel, which is your mind doesn't understand the difference between a virtual reality experience and a physical reality experience. In their world, Roblox bucks were currency. US dollars were just this weird paper that, that's just one way to pay for it. But here's the other one. So there's two things on it. One is kind of that blending of realities. And the second one was the thirst for knowledge and authentic individualized experience. And this is where I think, we have such an incredible opportunity here in terms of individualized learning. We've been taught through business schools forever. Michael Porter, I'm a huge fan of Michael Porter. head of strategy teaching at Harvard Business School, and he says there's two strategies. You can either have a highly differentiated product, which is bespoke, takes a lot of, it's very costly to deliver it, bespoke for each person, or you can have a commoditized product where your focus is on being the low-cost provider. You have to choose one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
What you're talking about building here is really has the advantages of both, because that's really only in the physical world.
Right.
With individualized learning like this, you have the advantages of the individualized experience with the low cost based provider of a fixed cost, almost fixed cost platform.
Mm-hmm.
We have not seen that in the world of the physical businesses operating with actual materials. Mm-hmm. And so that requires, I think, a bit of a retooling of our thinking about these business models.
I love that. That actually goes in and correlates to the next question. How do we tweak these business models of like MIT, right? MIT, to give you the certification of passing the MIT 4-year, okay, here's your undergrad certificate, right? That may cost you thousands of dollars, even $100,000, right? And or you can take the same course online, take the same thing, and you actually get it potentially for free, right? But it's the stamp and certification of that is the cost. So the NFT, the equivalent of the NFT, what we're looking at is how do you then, of course, the name of MIT behind it is definitely something of worth. But how do we, like you said, at scale, how do we get it in a win-win? So, Michael, would love to discuss with you how that in the next section with that opportunity, what models are you seeing with the free education and what you're doing with teaching in terms of correlating that to cartoons? How do you see that? How do you educate through cartoons and being able to give opportunities through?
I mean, there really isn't free education. I mean, if you look at the public school system, although, children go there for free, it's subsidized by taxpayer money and so forth. So, there's nothing is free in this world. And the way I see the metaverse, and I'll prelude is right now I'm in addition to my role as Life Stuff president, we create content, inspirational content for the masses with podcasts and so forth. I also have been in IT for the past 30 years. I own a support services company. I started out as a programmer way back in college, loved it, haven't touched code in many years. But then I decided to follow my passion and write for children. It was something that I've always loved to do. And about 6, 7 years ago, I decided to do it. It was something that when my kids were growing up, that was an event that we did regularly. We read to them at night. We had these, these story times and so forth. And they would love to read any type of book, any type of children's book. And sometimes I would throw in my stories. And that's how it evolved. They'd rather hear my stories versus reading their books. And they would tell me every night, Dad, tell us a story about the little bird. So, 15 years later, after a company was formed and so forth, they decided to write these books. But what I love about what's happening here with Web 3.0 and the metaverse, and I'm very much into providing education for the masses, free education. I want the world to be able to go and socialize and interact and so forth. And what we're doing now, believe it or not, is I'm writing a book on the basis of crypto for children and blockchain. And we're going to take that series of books into the metaverse. And we're going to now enhance and expand on what they read on these pages so they'll be able to interact and so forth. And yes, I see it as free for everyone. I see it as subsidized, by sponsors. I think that's the easiest way to offer free education. Is you have the sponsor's logo on these, different environments or different lands that children are going on. But that's how I see education going. I mean, my books, believe it or not, Joshua, I've had gamification in my books from the very beginning. I never just wrote a book where kids would sit there and read it and then that was it. No, they needed to engage. They needed to get something more out of it. And I would use all these different techniques, all these different play techniques, like foreshadowing. I love foreshadowing, where you put in little clues, different pages to tell the reader what's going to happen later. And they might not realize that the first time they read it. But when they read it subsequently, they'll say, wow, there's a little clue that tells me what's going to happen later. I use all these different techniques, alliteration, fun words. I even use harder words for kids 3, 4, 5 years old, because I want the kid to turn to their parent and say, what does this mean? And then they engage with it and so forth. And, eventually we were going to turn them into apps where they can click on a little, something on there to enhance and expand on their learning. But gamification for me is always huge. I feel it's so important. My children we always played while they learned, and they didn't realize it. They didn't realize they were learning from their play, and that's key.
That's the best learning. I love that. That's amazing. And Jay, tell us a little bit about with Prasaga, how you're doing certifications, like eventually MIT, gives you certification, 4 years, you passed, etc. Whether it's you passing, watching it on YouTube, or you actually going to MIT and actually getting the actual certification from the university. What does that learning experience look like in terms of being able to prove that truth of, hey, I went through this process,
Yeah, we've been looking at that from a number of different perspectives, and obviously knowing what truth is and having it certified is part of the challenge on a blockchain. You can have somebody stating something as true, and if it's not, then it's just as problematic as if it weren't immutable,
Yeah.
or maybe even more so.
Yeah.
So we've been working both with existing certification bodies to help them to understand how blockchain can assist in verifying these things. We've been in discussions with a number of different universities relating to curriculum and in knowing that our code is certified, or the developer is certified at some level. Just like getting through school, there are lots of ways to potentially get the certification and not necessarily have the expertise that's represented by it. And so we've been trying to look at, obviously everybody runs into this with different testing scenarios, etc. But especially if you put online certifications up, people figure out how to game them, and maybe it proves they're that intelligent if they can write the bot that solves the certification for them. But that's not what the testimony is. So I think one of the things that we're looking at is the fact that we've got to rethink certifications to a certain degree, that the way we've approached them in the past isn't necessarily, you need to be able to prove that you have a certain level of understanding of subject matter in education, and yet testing towards knowing what Google can now give me as far as memorization is not necessarily the methodology that's going to serve. It's getting the frameworks, the contexts, and the approaches to be able to learn.
Yeah.
And that's the part where we have to look at not so much just using the old pedagogy that was very didactic and created a top-down control, but creating tools where, and we've talked a lot about peer-to-peer certifications and some of these different elements, but there have to be those feedback loops.
No, 100%. And I think that's what's beautiful about this partnership with Prasaga and Leanne. You could talk about MetaHug and Play to Learn. That feedback loop, it's like an R&D for kids. So basically for Prasaga, creating that for universities, being able to have that feedback loop for certifications and say, okay, eventually, of course, the goal having interoperability between game engines, whether it's centralized or decentralized. So the NFT class that you took in Roblox is the same, it gives you the same MetaHug points as in Fortnite, right? And so being able to have that and issuing that, that new certification, that new standard from Prasaga, and having interoperable with Polygon, with others, and to being able to see that as value. I know that it's the one layer, Prasaga is talking about the one layer, but being able to at least understand and communicate with that standard, right? And being able to communicate is so important. In the same way that you can have assets, of course, being between Unity and Unreal, having those interoperable and for them to at least understand each other is so valuable. And I think that's, maybe Leanne, you can discuss that framework, talking about what that means, certifications, almost like a Girl Scout, Boy Scout for even the kids that may not be ready for university for the MIT certification yet. But similar to a Boy Scout, Girl Scout, hey, I took this class. I'm a better citizen for the world. How can I, how can I be encouraged? And that kind of goes into the next question, the intrinsic motivation. But just talk about that.
Yeah, no. So basically, like in our game, I guess it's giving them, well, it's kind of like giving them badges, Girl Scout, Boy Scout badges, but we do it in a form of collectible, so similar to NFT. So just like bridging education to where they don't feel like it's education is really important. Like what Michael was saying earlier, it's just built in by design. So in Roblox, a lot of them already have a wallet where they are somewhere on the game, they're collecting their points. We just design it to look like a MetaMask, so they understand the feel of it as a crypto wallet. We have a marketplace that we're going to have where it's going to have all the assets and skins and badges and whatnot. But we went back to the last lesson that Sharon and I did for growth mindset. They're collecting that mindset, that NFT. And in the future, if it's something that we can't bridge directly, like we have this meditation that we're doing, and they sit there and do the meditation the whole 3.5 minutes in Roblox, then the lily pad like floats up, and then it unlocks that asset, and then now they own that little lily pad, and now they can fly around the world and tour the world. So it's just
we'll do that later, actually, too. So
yeah, that's just gamifying it and understanding what motivates. They love collecting, just like we love collecting. It's similar to the way they collect in the game is very similar how what we collect as NFTs or what's hot now. It's very similar, but we're just bridging different ways how we word it. And just like how my daughter goes to Acton, it's not grade based. It's like a little bit like Montessori, where it's just badges, right? You go at your own pace, you learn what you want to learn, you lead your own education, you collect badges. It's our Roblox Meta Hug game framework is set up pretty similar to that.
Nice. And that certification for the NFTs is still different than the social tokens, which is more like Meta Hugs that you earn when you learn. And similar to like a Chuck E. Cheese or any game, you play the games, you get your tickets or tokens, and then you redeem them at the end for prizes, right? And that's what we're doing, and paying it forward, playing it forward as you were. Nike has their Air Jordans, and you get to put your points towards that. The kid with cancer, and then you collectively get those together. So it's about the intrinsic value, the intrinsic motivation. That goes on to the next question. How exactly does gamification improve intrinsic motivation for learning? Andres, you're a father, you have kids that understand this subconsciously as well. How does that intrinsic motivation for learning, what is that? How does gamification improve that?
Well, that's a great question, Joshua. So before talk about how I perceive this from my children's point of view, this is a case that happened right now with one of the biggest exchange in the world right now. They're doing this gamification process for one of their products. Is called Something Life. I don't want to say the name of the exchange, but probably who I'm talking about. No. But this exchange have 100 million users, and they just launched this social media platform that people is basically watch to earn. And I didn't pay much attention to it until my good friend from Venezuela, he kept telling me, Andre, you need to join the platform. You need to join the platform. It's amazing. I said, why? Say, just come to the chat with me one day and you'll find out what. So what they have done is very, very good, because you have to watch the video at least 5-10 minutes or 1 hour. Any of these live, it's broadcasting. But then the people get mystery boxes, So I was asking my friend that had been there longer than me, and he said, Andre, you can give all these viewers some mystery boxes. I said, what can I give them? He said, no, just give them Shiba, give them something. I said, okay. So I had like $50 in Shiba, and then I started to create this mystery boxes. Basically, I put 10 Shibas, $10 worth of Shiba. I divided between 300 people, and then they get all these tokens. And my friend told me off, and I said, why are you doing that? You are doing this every 10 minutes. I said, yeah, it's only $10. He said, no, what I do it every hour. I give $10 among 1,000 people, and people love it. I said, what do you mean? So yeah, because a lot of people are watching this program from third world countries like Colombia, so in India, Africa, and just token for them, even if 5 cents, 10 cents, 50 cents, it keeps an incentive. And on top of that, they can go to a higher competition that if they complete the task for that day, they can win a big amount of crypto from the exchange. So yeah, that took me by surprise, like, because I've been outside of Colombia for 14 years, but sometimes I forget that $200 is the minimum wage in Colombia. Like $5 can change the life of a whole family in one day. Wow. So yeah, gamification is very important. I have learned the hard way recently with my kids, because they love video games, and they love go to the arcade. And then we go on holiday, we spend $100, $200 a day just trying to get these vouchers, these tickets, and then you ending up, actually I have it here. I spent like $100 to get this ball. No joking. It was like 1,000 vouchers. I had it here in my hand, but it's funny. So the guys love gamification, the kids, and that's why it's going back to emotions, Even me, I get emotional getting these tickets and playing with my children. I say, no, I need more. Then I see the next to me, they have more vouchers. I say, no, we're going to have the bigger prize. So I think so. If you use gamification to learn, this is what we did when we were little. When I was little, my mom used to gamify the house. Like, you have to do the dishes, you have to do this, and then you get 1 or 2 pesos, and then at the end of the week you can go get something in the shopping mall. So yeah, gamifications are going to get the change. But for me, we as an adults have a responsibility so that we don't spoil our children through the gamification process, because we want them to win everything fast and quick. So it has to be a sweet spot between something that they can learn and earn quickly, but they don't get bored. That's the difficult part. My son, and I want to finish with that. My son, he loved watching his YouTube video, and he spent hours, and then he said, come and watch this, and you probably can make money. And then I told him this the other day, Emilio, you rather to watch something that's very boring and make money, or you rather to watch something that is very fun and make no money? And he said, Daddy, I rather to watch something that can make some money, right? Said, but it's going to be big. So we have to find the sweet spot.
Yes.
We have to find the spot.
Oh, I love that. I mean, that's basically going into the next question. What screen time do you experience that is entertaining and valuable? John, you can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, since we're time crunch. If you want to cover both, basically, how exactly does gamification improve intrinsic motivation for learning? And then now segueing to what screen time do you experience that is entertaining and valuable? John, you guys are such great storytellers. I mean, we could go on for hours. All the panelists are amazing storytellers. So John, I know there's 1,000 different stories you have, but in terms of intrinsic motivation, I know that you help so many and mentor so many. How do you see that screen time? Have you seen anything out there that's both entertaining and valuable? Then
well, yeah, and there's a whole resource that the community, the educational community can tap into on it. I want to go back and pick up something Andreas just said, which is really fascinating to me, and we spent tons of time on that. So when I was running an online exchange for the global bond market, I was also involved with a lot of the early crowdsourcing companies for crowd fundraising. And so we did a lot of work, and it got to the point of going to MIT and hooking up students' brains to sophisticated computers to watch what parts of their brains were firing up when we're presenting them with different visual images, okay? So Andreas, the reason that you paid $100 for a 25-cent ball is because you're not just paying for that. What you're paying for is the time with your kids, and also you're paying for the thing that after the first 800 calories a day of basic food, what we're really spending our time going for is experiences in which our hypothalamus is engaged to produce a neurohormone called dopamine. And that's what it's all about. So Leanne, when you talk about adding points on a Girl Scout merit badge sash, or making the lily pad float up so you can unlock a reward, you're talking about building a dopamine reward cycle. Now, this is something that the Silicon Valley people, for better or for worse, and a lot of them doing this work are complete sociopaths, just to be clear. They have done an immense amount of work on this. And everything, there's a reason that on your smartphone, that there are certain alerts are in certain colors or in red. Now, so we have the opportunity, or you guys have the opportunity, to take all the research building up dopamine cycles. That's what addiction is. That's why people do heroin. That's why men chase women, right? That's why we exist as a species. We're all going after a dopamine hit from some pleasure center part of our brain. Well, the good news is we can take it and put it to use other than making people engage to try to kill each other on Twitter, right? I'm not saying it's a negative thing, but surely we can get better than that. If you doubt the value of the research, let me challenge everybody participating in the panel, but also watching this. Perform an experiment on your own brain in the next week. You can go online on YouTube and figure out how to grayscale your smartphone. And in 3 or 4 buttons, you can turn all of these pretty colors into different shades of black and white. And then you also have the way to measure how much screen time you spend looking at that phone last week versus this week. Experiment with your own brain, and you will see how powerful these dopamine systems are. Colors, the choice of colors, the specific choice of graphics. These are incredibly powerful. We have amazing research, most of it coming out of Stanford, most of it being applied for, frankly, degenerate junk. Surely we can apply it for better purposes like education.
I love it. I love, John, what you just said there. I mean, I always say what Facebook uses for bad, we use for good. And that correlation to what you said, black and white compared to color, that's how I see the traditional education system in the classroom. And we bring it to life. We bring it to color. So the kids on Roblox, they're having that dopamine is firing, right? They're enjoying it. They're with their friends. And that's what's so different. A lot of the play to learn models in the past have been their own platforms, but they haven't reached that dopamine because the kids are not at that high. They're not in flow state. So the beauty of what we're doing is we're coming to them at where they're at in their flow state. And we're meeting them to soak up at the highest level of retention, that valuable information that their teacher in the classroom can't get them to retain because they're not in that same flow state with that dopamine hit. So that's the beauty of everything that we're doing. I love that you articulated that so well, John. It's an amazing, thank you so much. I love that.
Josh, just one more point, if I may.
Yeah.
We talk about gamification, and I just want to be sure that we don't go down that we put it in context.
Yeah.
Gamification is not the strange new topic in human experience. Gamification is what happens when you leave kids alone. They gamify stuff.
Exactly.
Gamification is probably better defined as the way human brains think if you're not screwing with them, right? Yeah. Classroom lecturing, that is the artificial force that was imposed on humans. That's what's unnatural. Gamification is just how human beings behave and see the world, interact with it.
I love that point. John, that's an incredible point. Michael, to you, basically, I know there's a lot to add to this, but what your perspective on the metaverse, the children's, as you as an author, how do you see motivate kids when they're reading what you're writing? How do you connect with them?
Again, it's more of the John. By the way, that was fantastic. I think you nailed it with that last statement. That's exactly what it is. Leaving kids alone to learn and to enhance their own experiences. For me, when I write, as I mentioned earlier, you add these elements, fun elements, and that's what gamification is about. And that's what children do. They want and for them to learn and to grasp what they're learning and to want to learn more. Classroom, like we said, it just doesn't work. Beating up a kid and saying 1 + 1, learning 2 + 2, and so forth, without adding different elements, some kids are just not going to learn that way. And you got to just add all these fun elements. And engagement is very important. I feel engage the kids to ask questions. It's so important. I do a lot of lectures at schools. I go and I read my stories, and then I teach them about how to create a book from an idea all the way to the very end. And the teachers come to me at the very end and they're like, oh my God, you created this amazing thing. The kids and we're talking, my books are the 3 in the 3 to 8 year range, but I
Yeah.
go and I do lectures to 12-year-olds, and those kids get more of my books at that point than younger kids, because they see the value of engagement. They see the value of, each book has a glossary at the end that teaches kids more than what the story is about. It teaches them, about different animals that are there and what they do and their environments, their ecosystems, and so forth. So, adding that element, and again, it's for me, it's gamification. It just makes the kid want to do more, and so forth. And one last thing that we're doing recently is I created a charitable foundation, because going to these schools, and we would sell our books there at certain things, I would see children that didn't have the means to buy these books, and my wife and I said, we can't do this anymore, and these kids will need to get these books in their hands. And there was this one story, and I get choked up all the time. We're sitting there, we're selling books. There were people at our table buying all these books, and this little boy who comes and hugs my book because I had done a lecture in his classroom, and he puts it down, and he keeps coming back and puts it down. Finally, at the end of the night, when we're signing some books for his sister comes over, and she was about, I would say, 14. The boy was 8, and she takes out quarters